You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
Cults are everywhere. They don't just live in the walls of NXIVM and Scientology.
There are sex cults,
Self-help cults,
workout cults,
political cults,
even legging cults.
And on the podcast, Was I in a Cult?, we focus on the brave individuals who have lived through them.
I'm Liz Iacuzzi.
And I'm Tyler Measom.
Your host of Was I in a Cult?
Join us each week as we take you through a heroic roller coaster of someone's journey in and out of a cult.
With a little levity thrown in because humor is healing and cults are funny.
Listen to and follow Was I in a Cult at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Which for Tyler is at Rite Aid.
On tape.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play in comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we dive into the facts of the Robert Wone case and try and figure out what in the world was going on. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my blissful co-host, Alice.
Blissful. Wow. It has been a blissful time. We just partied all weekend, Brett. You actually came to a party I invited you to. That's blissful.
I did, and I had a great time, too, which is even more
time.
rare.
Don't you sound so surprised?
No, it was a lot of fun. Alice and I got to hang out over the weekend. Went to a birthday party, kid's birthday party, baby Brittany's birthday party.
I was going to say, which kid?
Which kid? If you're listening to this, you probably were just shocked into stunned silence because it's true. Baby Brittany.
Oh my gosh,
baby
her name is
Brittany.
not Brittany.
Baby Brittany.
Get the name right.
Is a year old, and I just can't even believe it. I'm stunned.
I am actually stunned too. If we didn't have like 52 weeks worth of episodes between our two podcasts, I wouldn't believe it. Because you know what? I blocked out for the last year. I don't know what happened for the last year. I'm not going to lie. I think I was very sleep deprived. I still am, but I have no idea what happened. So you guys hold all of my memories for the last year.
And you're doing a great job with it too. And now we're back with this just mind-blowing case. And I know a lot of you guys have already started talking about this case, talking about the twists and turns, just the bizarre things. And we've only barely scratched the surface. Today, we're really going to dig into the facts as were developed at the bench trial in this case. We're going to talk about some of those facts, and we're going to talk about the conclusion the judge reached. And I'm very interested to hear whether you think the judge got it right or not. And I'm very interested to hear what Alice thinks about that as well, because I think that is actually a pretty difficult question. It's a close question, and I can't wait to get there. But first, we want to go through some of this evidence. And there's one thing that we talked about, but we haven't played it. And I think it's worth playing, and that's the 911 call. Every now and then, we'll play 911 calls in our cases, usually when it's something strange about it or it forms sort of a core of the case. And I think this 911 call actually had an effect on the prosecution and on the way they viewed this case. Remember, what they eventually did, they didn't charge anyone with murder because they didn't feel like they could get there. But what they decided was that every single one of the people in that house that night was involved in this crime one way or another, whether they held the knife or whether they helped cover it up. And I think that really started with this 911 call placed by Victor Zaborski. We're going to play it for you. It's about 7 minutes long. It's worth listening to. Listen to it. Think about it. As we've said before, it's always a little bit of a fool's errand to try and take a lot out of these 911 calls. But that doesn't mean you can't get anything out of them. And I think this one is worth listening to, particularly the sort of internal idiosyncrasies of the call. It's one thing to say someone's too dramatic or they're not dramatic enough. But this one is one of the few 911 calls I've ever listened to where the emotion seems to swing back and forth throughout the call. So we're going to listen to it. Here we go. This is the 911 call from the night that Robert died.
DC Emergency 911 Operator 6752. Do you need police, fire, or ambulance?
Immediately. We need an ambulance.
What's wrong, ma'am?
We had someone that was in our house, evidently, and they stabbed somebody.
Okay, somebody's inside the house now?
I don't know. We heard.
Are they bleeding? You see someone bleeding?
Someone is bleeding in our house.
Okay, where's they bleeding from?
I think in the stomach.
In the stomach? Is he cautious? Calm down for me. I'm going to send some help, okay? Female or male?
It's a male. He's a friend of ours. He was spending the night with us.
Okay, and who was the person that stabbed him? Do you know? Is he conscious?
We need an ambulance.
Ma'am, listen to me.
He's not conscious.
He's not conscious at all?
No. We need someone right now.
Is he breathing? Listen to me. Calm down. I'm going to help you, okay? Is he breathing?
I'm upstairs, and he's downstairs. I don't know.
Okay, who's downstairs with him?
My partner is downstairs with him right now. He told me to go upstairs and call the police immediately. I just went to the stairs.
Okay, who's the person? Okay, I'm sending paramedics and the police. Okay, who's the person that stabbed him?
I don't know. We think it's somebody with an intruder in the house. We heard the chime at the door.
And it's 15, ma'am, calm down. 1509 Swan Street, Northwest. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
The person that stabbed him, is he still in the home?
I don't know.
We got help en route, okay?
Pardon me?
We have help en route.
Thank you. They're here.
They are en route to you now. I'm sending the police and the paramedics, okay, to assist. Okay, what I need you to do is go downstairs, okay? The place wherever he was stabbed at, I need you to get a dry cloth, okay, and just apply pressure to that area. Wherever he was stabbed at on his body, I need you to take a towel downstairs while you're waiting for the paramedics to arrive and just apply pressure. Even if the rag or towel is saturated with blood, just get another towel and put it on top, but never lift the first towel off the area. Hold it on. Once it gets filled up with blood, just put another towel on top of that and just apply pressure until the paramedics arrive.
Pressure until the
Yes.
on the leg.
Yeah.
With stab in the heart.
In the heart?
Yes. In the center of his chest.
Okay. Is he breathing?
Is he breathing?
We have help en route now, okay? You don't know who it was?
No idea. So don't touch this.
Okay, is he breathing?
He's breathing, but he needs help now.
Okay, we have help en route, ma'am, okay? We do have help en route. Okay, just go down there and try to tell your husband or your other the other half to just try to keep him calm and talk to him, okay? Keep him calm and talk to him until someone gets there.
Okay.
And at the same time, get a dry cloth and just hold it right there in the area.
My partner's holding the
Okay,
holding it on him.
Okay, and once it gets saturated with blood, tell him get another one. Go get another towel so you can apply it on top of that one once it gets filled up with blood. We need you to apply pressure on that area.
He is applying pressure right now.
Okay, just hold it there until the paramedics get there. They should be pulling up any moment if they're already en route to your location. You don't know who did this.
We have no idea who did this.
Is the door open so they can get in?
We don't know how they got in.
Okay, well, I'm asking you now, is the door open so the paramedics can get in once they get here?
What? Sorry. What were you saying?
Is the door open so they can get in? Is the door open so the paramedics can get in the home?
I'm going to go down.
Is this a private home or apartment?
It's a home.
It's a home. It's 1509 Swan Street, Northwest.
The person had one of our knives.
The person that stabbed him ran out the door with a knife?
I think so.
Okay, anybody get any type of description of the person that came in the
I
home?
have no idea. We have no description. We heard the chime, and we heard the scream from our friend.
Okay.
And so we came running downstairs. We ran in.
So you both was upstairs and your friend was downstairs?
Yes.
You heard the door open and then you heard the scream?
I didn't hear the door open until after the scream, and then we ran down the stairs and we heard we have an alarm, and so the chime went off.
Okay.
Is the ambulance? Please, we really need the ambulance.
Okay, they en route now, ma'am. Go to the door. They should be pulling up any moment. Okay.
I'm afraid to go downstairs.
Okay, the person who's downstairs was the person that was assaulted.
No, we're on the second floor.
Okay, so somebody need to go downstairs and open the door for the paramedics. You're not sure if that person's still in the home or not.
I have no idea.
Okay, we have paramedics en route, okay?
What time is it?
What time is it at the moment?
Yes.
23:54. It's 11:54, ma'am.
54.
Yes.
I mean,
I'll stay on the line with you. I will stay on the line until somebody gets here, okay? I won't hang up.
we need them right now. I'm not hanging up, but we need help now.
Okay, they en route, ma'am. They are en route. Let me know when you hear the paramedics. Can you look out the window and see if you hear them coming?
I'm looking out the window, and I see nothing. I see nobody.
Okay, it seems like forever, but they are en route, ma'am. They're coming.
Here they are. Here they are.
They're there?
I'm going downstairs.
Okay. I'll stay on the line with you till you open the door for the paramedics, okay?
Help us. We have someone was stabbed. They're on our second floor.
Ma'am?
No, it's really an emergency. I mean, maybe. Please hurry.
Ma'am, it's going to be okay.
All right. So that's the 911 call from the night that Robert was murdered, the night that someone was stabbed in their home. Unclear who. There's so much you could say about this call. And Alice, I'll just lead us off. What do you think?
There really is so much to talk about. Okay, I'm just going to kind of paint broad strokes and then we'll fill in the details. Certain things, I have listened to this before, but I was taking notes as we listened this time to kind of have this continuous discussion. So the things that strike me immediately off the bat is if you had a line drawing kind of what's happening during the call, it's a very interesting line. So if we are graphing his level, Victor's level of anxiety, crying, freaking out, whatever, it starts off high, as often 911 calls do. Then it strangely, in the midst of a lot of background conversations where he's not listening to the 911 operator, specifically, it's when she keeps asking, is the door open? And that is very in line with both, is there someone coming in who's an intruder, and if there's going to be a way for the paramedics to get in. At that point, you can hear that he's not listening to the 911 operator. Up until that point, there was like a one-on-one conversation, 911 operator and Victor. And then at that point, it's almost like he's getting distracted with something else, and you can hear murmurs in the background. There's conversation. It's clear that he's having conversations. From that point forward, his tone takes a drastic about face, and no longer is the anxiety level, the crying, the, someone's just been murdered in my home reaction the same level. All of a sudden, if you're graphing it, it's a line graph, it drops down, and all of a sudden it's a weird calm. And this is when he asks the what time is it sort of thing, and several other very interesting notes, because the actual substance of the conversation I don't think has changed. They still talk about stabbing. They still talk about blood, saturating towels. They still talk about pressure. So the substance of the conversation is the same as the first part of the call, but his tone is completely different. It sounds calm. It sounds like he's being told what to say. It sounds like there's a lot of back and forth with someone else in the room, not the 911 operator. And then when the paramedics arrive, all of a sudden it ratchets back up above the level of freaking out as when he started the call. That's kind of the uncontrollable sobbing. And those two things were very stark to me because they were both about faces, and they did not ramp up. They did not ramp down. It was as if kind of a guillotine dropped at 2 points in the call that slammed me in the face when I listened to it the first time, and yet again now. So that's kind of graphing the call. There's a lot to discuss, obviously, within the substance. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and just the physical location, it sounds like he is still on the third floor, sort of maybe standing up at the top of the stairs. And maybe Joe Price has gone down. It's weird because at times he makes it sound like he's standing right next to Joe Price. For instance, when the paramedic says to apply pressure, and he says he's applying pressure, it's as if he's down the stairs standing next to Price while he applies pressure, which, by the way, if Joe did that, there's absolutely no evidence of it. There are no bloody towels. And it's interesting because one of the things that there's going to be a fight about is, was the blood sort of internal, and that's why you don't see a lot of it all over the place. But it seems like if you were applying pressure to someone who was still alive, which you would think, given the timing here, Robert would be, even if he didn't make it to when the paramedics arrived, that you would at least see some bloody towels. But the only bloody towel you see is one that has very little blood that the prosecution has another theory about altogether. So in that moment, he's sort of, where is he? Because at one point he says he's afraid to go downstairs. He didn't want to go downstairs, right? Then another point, he's standing next to him. At another point, it sounds like he's asking all the questions that he's being asked to the 911 operator, not witnessing things with his own eyes. At another point, he says he's on the second floor. It's very unclear where he is at the various points. Now, maybe he's sort of wandering up and down the steps. Maybe sometimes he is down there. He clearly never goes down to the first floor because he says he's afraid to go down there, presumably because the intruder could still be there. Another thing that stands out to me is the scream. So the scream is often described as a scream. People heard a scream. It's like, what scream would this be? But here, he specifically says, we heard our friend scream. So now maybe he's just attributing that to Robert, but just think about the timing of all this. So you hear him scream, you get up. They, at least by their own telling, they didn't stay upstairs very long. Now, maybe they did. Maybe they stayed up there for a while. Now they're embarrassed by it. I don't know. We're going to get in the timeline in a second. They couldn't have stayed up there that long, just given how little time there is for this to happen. But they say they heard a scream. Presumably, that would be when Robert's being stabbed. Something's happening to Robert. If Robert is screaming, then he is reacting to what's happening to him. That is inconsistent with all the medical evidence. There's no medical evidence that Robert reacted at all to what happened to him. And if he's screaming, by the time they get down there, he should still be alive, at least for a little while, and that isn't consistent with what we see from the EMTs. One other thing I'll say before I'll shut up for a second. Alice talked about his voice rising and falling, and one thing that I thought was interesting, if you sort of graph the portions of the call that you would think were scripted, so the portions of the call he sort of thought about beforehand, those parts are very emotional. Whenever he is asked a question where he has to think and answer it, all of a sudden it's very level and it's not emotional anymore, and he sort of answers it very straight away. And then when he asks what time it is, another one that would not have been a scripted part of the call, is very level. Doesn't mean it's scripted. It's just interesting that when you lay it out, that's what you see with the rising and the falling of his voice.
Yeah. One really quick note about how this call was and where his location was. I mean, it was all over the place from I'm on the 3rd floor, but I was on the 2nd floor because the reason we know, at least he's on the 3rd floor, is he said, I don't know, I'm with the body. But then he said, but my partner told me to go upstairs and make a call, indicating he was previously downstairs. And so there are certain things he would have known because what he was asked is he still breathing? It's possible that when he was downstairs, he got so freaked out and left. A couple things, I mean, there's, again, so many things to discuss. A couple things that also really jumped out at me, other than kind of the rise and fall of his voice and how he was talking, whether it was scripted, with emotion, without emotion. Number one, within the first seconds of the call, the 911 dispatcher accurately asks, what do you need us to send? And he responds, ambulance. He never says police. But throughout the call, he says, I'm too scared to go downstairs. And he keeps mentioning an intruder. He does mention there was a chime that the door opened. But if he's not able to answer the question, or at least he does not answer the question as to whether the door is still open. And so if an intruder had run out the door and there had been a chime, most intruders probably don't turn around and make sure the door is locked. There's a high probability that the door is still unlocked, and whoever did this may want retaliation, come back, what have you. All that I'm trying to say is throughout this call, he mentions at multiple points that he is scared. Scared about what? He mentions an intruder at some point, never asks for a police. Never. Even after the dispatcher says, I'm sending an ambulance and police. Another word for police. That's not the exact quote. But he doesn't say, oh my God, thank God you're sending police as well. He never acknowledges the police section. And the second thing, the absence of something that really stuck out to me, is he never mentions Robert's name. He says, someone was stabbed. When pressed, he said, it's our friend. And he never says, it's Robert. Now, everyone reacts differently in situations of high stress, but typically when something has happened, you're just trying to give as much information as possible. Now, it's possible this dispatcher has no idea who Robert is. Why would you do that? But you will usually hear people say, oh my God, he doesn't live here. It's Robert. He just came for the night. He just got here. How could he be dead right now? No mention of him whatsoever. And why that may be relevant is someone's name can tell you a lot about them. It could potentially tell you their sex, right? Depending on where he's stabbed, certain things. Is he big? Is he little? Is he young? Is he old? Could tell you potential life-saving sorts of things. Because if this were a teenager or a child, for example, you don't do CPR a certain way. You have to do CPR fit for a child so you don't break their ribs, for example, right? And we don't know anything because the dispatcher keeps calling Victor ma'am. So it's very possible that the dispatcher thinks she is talking to a woman who might be a mother. Maybe that child has a sleepover. We don't know anything. All we know is friend, and no mention of any descriptors of the victim that could help the dispatcher give life-saving advice to Victor. So those two omissions I thought were very interesting.
Yeah, so put myself in those shoes. I don't know that I would say his name. I'm not sure that I would say his name. I don't know how much stock I put into not saying his name. I think it's weird that they called him someone. I think it's weird that it took Victor so long to say our friend. It's weird to me not to start with that. My friend has been stabbed. He's staying over. He was in our guest room. He's been stabbed. The someone, it's just like I said, the name thing, I don't know if I know some people think that's a huge red flag. I don't know if I think it's a big red flag because I don't know that I would say his name. But I certainly would say my friend has been stabbed. I don't know. Victor, who knows? Victor has Victor's own idiosyncrasies, and it's hard to say what they are, but it's strange to me that it takes so long for him to say that Robert is their friend. The other thing that I think is strange is that he mentions that the killer used one of their knives. This seems like the kind of thing that gets mentioned in 911 calls when you're already trying to create the story. We talked about this with Darla Routier. Just the pointing out these facts that, number one, would you really even notice in the heat of the moment? If you assume that Victor his brain is scrambled and he's all over the place when he's trying to think about this, you're trying to give him the benefit of the doubt for some of the other stuff. Then the sort of calculated moment where he's like, yeah, they stabbed him with one of our knives. It's just, I don't know. That was strange to me. I think this is a strange 911 call. As we've said before, I don't think you convict people on 911 calls, but you certainly can listen to them and see what you get out of them. Everybody's going to get different things, and that's one reason we both love and hate using them, because I don't put too much stock into them. But I think this one's weird because of what Alice started off with. We can dig into the precise words they used and when they used them, but the fact that it's so incoherent, not in the words he's saying, but in the emotion and the way it's being expressed, is strange to me. He breaks down once the EMTs get there. That can be interpreted one of two ways. One could be the flood of relief. He just loses it. He's held it together this long. Now the help is there. He sort of breaks down. The other, obviously, is he now has an audience that he's sort of performing for to show how broken up he is. Which one is it? I think, like everything, you have to take the 911 call, look at the rest of the evidence, and that's really going to influence how you view what you hear on this call.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Do you love shows like Criminal Minds and Mindhunter? Are you interested in what it's really like for the agents that break down the psychology of violent offenders, serial killers, and sexual predators? If the answer is yes, you'll love The Consult, Real FBI Profilers. I'm Julia Cowley. I spent 22 years in the FBI and was assigned to the renowned Behavioral Analysis Unit. Join me, along with my colleagues, retired FBI profilers Angela Surser, Susan Kostler-Drew, and Bob Drew, as we look at some of the most notorious cases that have ever come into the Bureau. We'll take you inside the tape and into our thought processes as we analyze the behaviors, motives, and methods of criminals like JonBenet Ramsey's killer, serial killers like Israel Keys and Joe DeAngelo, and we'll examine some of the most perplexing cases, such as the murder of Washington, D.C. attorney Robert Wone. It's more than just a podcast. It's a real-world look at how the FBI uses criminal psychology to assist law enforcement in our mutual quest for justice. Join our brand new Patreon for early and ad-free episodes and listen to The Consult, Real FBI Profilers, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Here's something that I find interesting. Whatever the reason. It appears that after the fact, when the three men are being interrogated or at least sat down and talked to by the first responders, it seems like Joe Price is the ringleader in terms of the one who's outward facing, who's talking. We've talked about how apparently at one point Dylan starts talking and Joe Price looks at him and Dylan stops talking. However, I think it's very interesting that both for the 911 dispatcher as well as the first responders, the paramedics in this case, it was Victor who was forward facing. So he's the one who's having the conversation with 911, and he's the one having the emotion, whether it's feigned or real. He's the one having that interaction. Remember, by his own words, he's upstairs, and he had said that his friend downstairs told him to go upstairs to make the call, meaning there's someone who is supposedly closer to the front door where the paramedics are come in. And it's not those who are closer to the paramedics who go downstairs and greet the paramedics. It's on that 911 call, we hear Victor say, "They're here, I'll go down." So he's the one who greets the paramedics. Again, it might just be that everyone else is occupied or whatever, but I think it's interesting if you think that this is a fake 911 call, because we have someone, Victor, who was not the outward-facing one when the three men were interrogated all together. It was, in this instance, to have the emotion, it was Victor who was like cast in the role to be the one crying for the 911 dispatcher and the one to be crying in front of the paramedics, because that was very stark. I would say when you draw that line graph, the end of this call is much higher in terms of emotion than the beginning of the call. And it's very possible we've been in those situations where you finally see a person face to face, but it's usually someone you know, like you've just been in a car accident and your loved one, like your spouse or your mom, shows up and then you break down crying because there's someone safe. We've seen that. These paramedics are strangers to him. That could still be the reaction he's having, but the level of emotion is much higher. And it is not Joe or Dylan who have those emotional encounters with the first responders, either in the dispatch call or when the paramedics arrive. And one other thing, because of there's clearly some communication with someone other than Victor on his side of the call, but you don't hear him repeat the questions. I at least didn't really hear it. It's possible he muffled it, but it makes me wonder, but I can hear things and they don't sound muffled. It makes me wonder whether this 911 call from the very beginning was all on speakerphone so that it was heard for all, and why maybe he changed so quickly and never answered the question, is the front door open? Because I can imagine someone looking up and being like, don't do it. You know, those of you who are not on YouTube can't see me. I'm doing like the sign across your neck saying, don't say anything. Don't answer that question. And there seemed to be enough communication from the other side, but not enough time for him to repeat the questions, that it appears to be on speakerphone. Being on speakerphone in and of itself, not suspect. But I think if we're trying to imagine the scene and what's happening, it's relevant, because if the people on the other line can hear what the 911 dispatcher is saying, that could affect how Victor is responding or not responding in such quick fashion. And I said that was going to be the last one. One more, and then I'll throw it back to you, Brett. Again, this is just from listening to lots of 911 calls, and it's more of like the pattern I see rather than it's indicative of guilt here. Multiple times, the 911 dispatcher notes that the towel you use to apply pressure is going to get drenched, is going to get saturated, but do not remove it. Never once does Victor mention, really? I don't see that happening. No, there's not that much blood. We're fine. Is that good? Is that good? What should I do now? And I say that because oftentimes if someone's having a heart attack or there's a stab wound or a bullet wound and the 911 dispatcher is trying to give some life-saving advice, like keep your pressure on them, keep your hand next to their mouth or whatever, and it doesn't match the situation, you'll hear the person who is making the 911 call correct the 911 operator and say, I don't see what you're talking about. Where do I do it? How do I tilt their head back? Their head's not tilting back. What do I do now? I don't see anything blocking their throat. What do I do now? None of that. And at least at one point he was by the body and would have known there was not saturation of the towel. Yet it was repeated so many times by the operator and never rebuffed or questioned by Victor.
Yeah, there's nothing about this call that makes you think these people are doing really anything to save Robert. And there's no evidence that they were. So this is one where the tone of the call and what's being said matches up with the evidence that we have. The other thing, and this is the last thing I'll say on this and we can move on because I think this is interesting. From the very beginning, with this 911 call, it was we. It was always we with these three. And it never stopped being we. It was, from this point forward, the three of these people, whether they are completely innocent or they're all guilty, were in this together. And they were going to be in it together. And all I can say is, if they were in it together, this is a unicorn. Because you have three people who are in a conspiracy who stick to it, who don't break, which you almost never see. And the fact that this case is so shocking to so many people because of that should just reinforce for you that you don't typically have a situation where more than one, in this case, more than two people would know what happened, and yet nobody talks. And yet, that's what you've got here. Now, maybe it's because it was an intruder, but if it wasn't an intruder and one of them involved, it's pretty remarkable. But from the very beginning, when they make this phone call, it is they're in this together. And you're going to see this as we get into the trial, which we're going to talk about now. So the trial was the closest thing we may ever get to knowing the truth about what happened to Robert Wone. It was lengthy. This was a 20-day-long obstruction of justice trial, which is wild were it not for the fact that really this is a murder trial. They can't charge murder. The best they can do is say there was a conspiracy here to cover this up. Not sure exactly which one of them did it, but we know all of them took part. That's what they have to prove. Basically, there was a murder. It wasn't an intruder, so one of them did it, and it's impossible for one of them to have done it and all three of them not to have assisted in the cover-up. That was the theory of the prosecution, and it was going to be a bench trial. We talked about this a little bit last time, that when you have a bench trial, I always thought that was just your right as a defendant. Apparently it's not. The prosecution could object, but they don't do that here. They don't object. And this is a huge advantage for us that they have the bench trial because, as we've said, when a jury makes a decision, the best you can do is you dig through the evidence like we often do. You go through the trial transcript. You're trying to discern why the jury did what they did, what was powerful for the jury and what wasn't. But with a bench trial, the judge writes an opinion with factual findings. And in this case, the judge's opinion was 38 pages long. We'll put it on the website, prosecutorspodcast.com. Read it. It's well worth reading. You're going to learn a lot. So let's start with the stabbing itself. We talked about this a little bit from the ME's report, and the court found that the wounds were unusually uniform in dimension, orientation, and depth. And this would have meant that Robert was entirely immobile when stabbed. Now, he would have become unconscious within about 60 seconds of the stab wound that transacted his aortic artery, which I believe is the last stab wound. So no matter what, it would have taken him about 60 seconds from that point to go unconscious. But we know that the other stab wounds, when they happened, somehow, they happened such that Robert was not moving and did not move as he was being stabbed 3 times.
And how much time did this actually happen in? Because we talked a lot about the seemingly tight timeline. Was there enough time for a cover-up? Was there enough time for these 4 men to have fallen asleep and for an intruder to come in undetected and then get away undetected? Well, it's often presented that this whole sequence of events happens in 79 minutes. But that's not actually right. It had to have occurred between 11:09, when Robert sent his last email, and 11:49, when Victor called 911. So a much shorter time than 79 minutes. And we thought 79 minutes was short already. And when the paramedics arrived only 5 minutes later, you heard it on that call, they arrived pretty quickly, Robert was already dead. But he was more than that. He wasn't recently deceased. He was already pale and cold to the touch. So pallor mortis, when the body becomes pale after death because there's no longer blood flowing through your body, takes between 15 and 20 minutes. Now, DC at this time was in a heat wave. Those of you who've lived in DC know what a heat wave in DC is like. It is hot and humid. The high was 99 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was 85 degrees at 11 p.m. that night. Hot, hot, hot. Now, the body's temperature decrease is known as algor mortis. The body cools at 1.5 degrees an hour until the body reaches room temperature under normal conditions. But variables can affect that. One is water. As you probably know, water conducts heat away from the body. This is why if you are at Disney World or other amusement parks during the summer, they have those little misters out for you. It's because when that mister falls on you, it evaporates and takes away heat from your body in order to cool you down faster. In fact, water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air.
The timeline in this case is just difficult to make any sense of. You know, like we said, the 79 minutes is how it's often presented, but it's not that. It's 40 minutes, less than 3/4 of an hour between when he sent that last email and when he died, or when he was found, when the 911 call is made. And I think another thing this does is it cuts off a lot of some of the more wild conspiracy theories here. If there was some crazy orgy, it was a fast orgy. If he was killed somewhere else and, moved, they did that fast. If there was a lot of blood somewhere else in that house, they had to clean it up incredibly fast. One thing that the paramedics suggested is that it looked like he had been bathed, whether it was before he died or afterwards. It makes you wonder about the water temperature. Just imagine he was stabbed and he was cleaned up and they throw him in the shower and they turn the water on. And it's cold water, and maybe that's conducting some of this heat away, and that's one of the reasons that when they get him, he's already cold to the touch. If you believe Victor, remember, what does Victor say? Victor says they heard the door chime, they heard their friend scream. That's what Victor says. Their friend scream. Not one of them. They heard their friend scream. Then they go down there. Then they call the cops. 5 minutes later, the EMTs are there. That doesn't fit with him being cold to the touch. He did not die and get cold that fast. It just didn't happen that way. Or, and we have to leave open this possibility that they're lying about something less significant. And the thing they're lying about is they heard that scream 40 minutes earlier. They heard it at more like 11:09 or whatever. And recall one other thing. He calls 911 at 11:49. When did the witnesses, the neighbors, say they heard a scream? They said they heard a scream between 11 and 11:30 when the news was on. That, by the way, if that was the scream of him either being stabbed or them finding him or them finding something, that is much more consistent with the 15 to 20 minutes that it takes for the body to become pale and for this, the body temperature thing is hard to explain, but for him to be cold to the touch, much more consistent with that. The story that Victor tells on the 911 call doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense with what you're seeing, with just the pure sort of physical facts on the ground when the paramedics arrive. And like I said, I think that's bad for Victor. In some ways, it's good for the three because I think it cuts out some of the more lurid possibilities just because there's not that much time.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you think, there's all these rumors about this being a sex thing. Look, sex things can take very little time, but 20 minutes is still a very, very quick time for a sex thing to then go wrong. Now, we'll talk more about this in the theories, but the thing, I want to address this now because a lot of people have theories about whether Robert was bathed or not. And that may explain some of the body temperature heat. But let's talk about what you have to believe for the shower thing real quick. Of course, water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. Absolutely. So that may be a reason that the timing is off. But you would have to think that the shower came after or during the stabbing based on the uniformity of those stabs. You kind of have to think that he was already gone, right? Whatever was happening, he was gone in the shower. It's pretty hard, even with 3 grown men, to move a full grown body that is, no pun intended, dead weight into not a walk-in shower, but like a bathtub, like a typical bathtub you would find that kids take a bath in. This was not some big walk-in shower with like 4 different shower heads. Okay. So with a curtain. So typically one person can fit in that, maybe 2 people. If one person has no agency to stand up, it's going to take some maneuvering. It would be pretty messy. You'd have to get him completely dry, hair and body, to the point where when he's laid back into bed, there's kind of no residue of wetness. I go to sleep with my hair wet all the time. It's pretty hard to get me completely dry, especially, again, when the person who's being dried off has no agency to help dry himself off. And that, in and of itself, think about the time that would take. That would have to fit into also this very tight timeline. All to say is this is completely a brain teaser because no matter which route you're going down, it takes time. And that's something we just don't have much of. Time.
Yeah, and the one other thing I'll say before we move on to the next thing, all of these they're not hard science. Pallor mortis, rigor mortis, liver mortis, all the various morties, they're all guesstimates that we use to try and get some general idea of when people died and all that other stuff. So don't take it as gospel. Don't take it as, they must have killed him because the rigor mortis, the algor mortis is off. No, that just sort of gives you an idea. Now, fortunately, in this case, the timeline is so short that they actually are pretty good. You know, if we were talking 8 hours afterwards, it'd be a lot less that we could draw from that. But just the short timeline is really one of the most mind-blowing things about this case.
The paramedics were not actually able to start lines on him, right? That's why they said that they did have multiple puncture wounds, just not all of the ones that were found on him, because they had to do more than one because they weren't able to successfully start a line. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. They poked him a lot.
Yeah, they poked him a lot. So hold your questions on that, because obviously we all know the body changes very quickly after death, and whether you can do certain life-saving measures depends on basically how dead you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to find if you look at the record, Robert had some very low-level electrical activity still going on in his heart, and they tried to do something, but that wasn't going to happen. I think essentially he had been dead for a while. His heart just hadn't caught up to it. Okay, the layout of the house and what the killer would have seen that night. This was something that the judge found to be very important. A few things, and I'm just going to read you what she wrote because it's really interesting. Remember, if you start with the theory that this is an intruder, then you have to assume that they were there for a reason, and they probably weren't there to kill Robert. It's unlikely that the intruder decided they were going to break into the house that day because this was their opportunity to kill Robert, and my goodness, they're going to do it. If they broke in, I mean, maybe they're just a crazed killer and they just want to kill somebody. But usually, you know, D.C., big city, people break in to steal stuff. So I'm just going to read you the description of the home and what they found. The second floor of the townhouse was up a somewhat steep flight of stairs. Mr. Ward's bedroom was at the very top of the stairs, at the rear of the house. Remember, Ward is the third person who lives in the home. He is the one who lives on the second floor. If one then turned to the right at the top of the stairs, one traveled towards the front of the house along a brief corridor that hugged the open railing overlooking the staircase downstairs, passing on the left a bathroom and an open sitting area. At the front of the house on the second floor was a study, also used as a guest room, in which there were a desk and a pull-out couch. This was the room in which Mr. Wone was found fatally stabbed by paramedics on August 2nd, 2006. The staircase to the third floor was immediately outside the guest room door. The third floor consisted of the master bedroom suite, which Mr. Price and Mr. Zaborski shared. The floors of the townhouse throughout the entire house, including the staircases to the second and third floors, consisted of uncarpeted hardwood flooring, so not exactly the kind of place that you can move silently through. And the police said that these stairs, very creaky. They made a lot of noise. The house was secured by an alarm system that caused the front and rear doors on the first floor to chime when they were being opened from a closed position. The rear door, which led from the kitchen to the patio, was a large, windowed door with a deadbolt lock that aligned horizontally when locked and vertically when unlocked. On the kitchen counter to the left, as one entered through the patio door, there was a wooden knife block filled with knives. There was a small flat-screen television mounted on a wall, also in the kitchen, visible as one entered from the rear patio. On the night of August 2nd, 2006, A laptop computer rested on the floor against the back of the couch in the living room and was visible as one passed from the kitchen to the area at the bottom of the stairs to the second floor. Upstairs, there was a flat-screen television in the sitting room, along with other electronics. So essentially, what the judge is doing here, by laying out the scene, she's making 2 points which people have seized on. The first is, if you walked up those stairs, when you did so, the first room you would come to would not be where Robert was. It would be where Ward was. In going up those stairs, you would make a lot of noise. You would also make a lot of noise walking throughout the rest of the house because it's a hardwood floor. And in doing all that, making all that noise and passing up one room, you would also pass a lot of valuable electronics, the kind of things that if you were in the house to rob, you would probably take. Not to mention, as we've said before, none of Robert's stuff, including both his wallets and his cell phone, were stolen. So if this person went in with the intention of committing a robbery, they never actually committed the robbery. They just went in, killed Robert, and then left. Guys.
The other thing about being so detailed about the layout of the house is from this description of the house, it appears that Robert must have been the target for this murder, because by walking down this narrow corridor, and it really is a narrow corridor, like if one man, really probably even like me, who's a shorter woman, outstretch their arms, they can touch wall to wall of the corridor. This is not very wide. So by going all the way to Robert's room, which is the interior of that hallway, farther away from your escape route, you're kind of minimizing your chances of being able to escape, because there's someone in the other bedroom. There's potentially someone who can be flying down the stairs from the third floor to attack you. So you could be in the middle of being attacked by 3 men who are all grown men. So imagine you're picking kind of the most vulnerable position to do your attacking. A place where the only way to your escape route is past another man's room where someone is, and also right above you where sound travels up are 2 men also up there. The intruder may not have known this, but typically if the intruder doesn't know anything about a house or who's in it, they go with what's right immediately in front of them. The laptop, the whatever. If they wanted blood that night, start opening doors. Start looking for the first door that has a person in it. The first door you come to where someone is in is not the room in which Robert is in.
And just another thing to note in this description, if you noticed, this stairway is open. So it's not like the stairway is closed off from the bottom of the house. The noise, any noise you made on the bottom would carry up the stairway. And as you're walking up the stairs, it would carry up. And look, some people are deep sleepers. Ward says that he took a pill. But remember, the other 2 said they were awoken by the chiming of the door opening and by the scream. If they heard the chiming of the door open, they didn't hear anything else. And also, they wouldn't have been asleep that long. They weren't in the middle of, an hours-long deep sleep when this happened. But given the timeline, you have to believe that they essentially just went up there and all 3 of them just fell immediately to sleep, and they were all asleep when this happened.
So let me give you a little bit of contract law that is uninterested in this case to illustrate a point here. So the description by the judge is that the second and third floors were uncarpeted. Why that matters, especially in DC, is that I lived in DC just a couple years after this case happened. But I lived in multiple different apartments and houses when I lived in DC. And basically all the DC landlords had kind of the same form rental contract because there are certain landlord-tenant laws, etc. So it's just easier to kind of copy everyone else's, right? This is what you get out there. This is kind of how much you have to pay in security deposit. And interestingly, in all 3 of my leases, about within 5 years of this murder, I had a clause in every single one of these contracts, and they're multi-pages. They say things like security deposit, when your monthly rent is due, how much you're charged in interest if it's overdue. And then there was this phrase that didn't exist in any of the other cities that I've lived in before. It said that in your living areas, you were required to have a rug. So in your bedroom and in your living room, you had to have rugs because these row houses, and by the way, where I lived were all row houses that had been converted to apartments or condos within a mile of this Swan Street home. So very similar in age and in build. And all of them were hardwood floor because they were built like in the 1800s when we used real oak to build everything, and it lasts forever and it's beautiful. But anything, especially when you have multiple floors of a house turned into apartment buildings. So first floor is a whole apartment, second floor is a whole apartment, third floor is a whole apartment. Everyone can hear what's going on in the upper floors. And to minimize noise complaints, you put down carpets. And it's so important to do that because it's like the best way to muffle sound is it's written into leases. And so we had to have carpets in our second floor row house apartment for this reason. So without those carpets, anyone who lives in these houses knows that you can hear everything because of the reverberations kind of through the bones and studs of the house.
And maybe they got used to that. They got 3 guys in the house. They're making a ton of noise, so they just got used to sleeping through the noise. I guess that's a possibility. I have lived in a house like this with roommates. When I was in law school, I lived in a house like this. And man, that was the loudest house I've ever been in. and there was sort of a point where it just didn't bother me as much. But what's strange about this is this would be a very unexpected sound that you're hearing. You know, this would be the kind of sound that would raise alarms. But maybe they just got used to it and they slept through it. I don't know.
Okay, so that was the description of the layout of the home. Let's talk about another character in this story, or lack of character, and that's the blood. There was almost no blood at the scene of the crime. 2 softball-sized spots of blood were on the bedding, and they were likely caused not by the murder, but actually when the paramedics rolled Robert over. All total, there was probably just 100 cc's of blood at the scene. The only other blood, other than on the knife, which was on the bedside table next to Robert's body, which we'll talk more about in a second, was on a white cotton terry cloth towel with bloodstains on it, lying on the floor near Robert's bag. The knife itself was a kitchen knife, and it had a visible amount of blood, some cut chest hairs, and a glob of human tissue or fat. So note, there's not blood on the ceiling. There's not blood on the headboard, not headboard, but the back of the couch. That is a pull-out couch. There's not blood on the floor. There's not blood on pieces of clothing like shoes or being tracked out into the hallway, down the stairs, out the front door. Nothing. You have 2 softball-sized blood stains on the bed, and then this towel that is not saturated in blood. So Dr. Henry Lee testified that the blood pattern was consistent with the knife being the murder weapon, while the prosecution argued that white fibers on the knife indicated that the towel was used to apply blood to the knife to fake that it was the murder weapon. Now, the reason to do this was so that the wounds were more consistent with a missing knife from Dylan Ward's knife set than the knife from the kitchen block. That's kind of why the prosecution would come up with that theory, right? Because Henry Lee is the expert testifying, the court decides to credit Henry Lee's testimony. Now we know that Lee's reputation has really taken a huge hit after he was found liable for fabricating evidence in a case out of Connecticut. And honestly, the more you do this, the more you realize that Henry Lee is a bit of a defense hack these days. He pops up a lot, and somehow his blood spatter pattern always fits whatever the defense's theory is.
Man, let me just say, I have lost a lot of faith in a lot of the famous experts in true crime. The longer we do this, the more I kind of shake my head at some of the stuff they say, which is not to say that Lee isn't right about this, but just more and more, ignore the name behind the finding. Read the finding and see whether or not it makes sense. And if it makes sense, if it fits with the facts, maybe it's right. But I'm pretty much done with Henry Lee. Henry Lee said it, so it must be true. Go back to the staircase and applying the facts. The stuff he said in that case fits with the facts. It fits with what you would expect, the whole cast-off thing. And then you have Dwayne Deaver turning out he's a complete charlatan. But like I said, I think you just got to take these case by case and do it with Warner Spitz. Do it with all these guys who show up in all these cases, because doing these cases, I've become jaded when it comes to the famous true crime experts.
I mean, I'll tell you this. Look, being an expert can be a very lucrative gig. If you get in good with a side and you just keep getting hired, it's good money. I'm not saying that the opinions are bought, because the majority of experts, certainly the experts I've worked with and the ones I've interviewed, which are many more than the ones I've hired, want to get it right because their reputation is on the line. They're typically still practicing in their field. That's what makes them an expert. So they have their, credibility in their real life profession to bear, as well as their reputation as an expert. So they take it seriously. So we're not saying that everyone can just be bought, but it's no secret that it is very lucrative to be an expert. With that said, it's not uncommon. In fact, the question I ask every single expert that I interview is, how many times have you been an expert for the plaintiff or prosecution? And how many times have you done it for the defense? Because that's the first question I expect the other side to ask, and it has an effect on the jury. I don't want to hire a prosecution hack. I also don't want to hire someone who only ever testifies for the defense. Most of the people I've ever hired as experts, whether it's financial money laundering experts or, what type of expert you have, it's amazing how many types of experts you can have, really anything. I like them to be pretty much down the middle. I do not like someone who only testifies for one side. I think it makes them a sharper thinker. They're more believable. They have more credibility when they testify, and I can point to the fact that they testify on all sides. And they are testifying for me because they believe in my case, and this is the truth based on their expertise. So with all that, though, whatever you think of Henry Lee, whatever has happened with his reputation, whether you think he's a defense hack or not, who knows? What matters is his opinion in this case. And one thing I will say that is very hard to explain away about that kitchen knife to say it wasn't the murder weapon is the fact that there's human tissue fat on it, as well as the cut chest hairs. Could those have been planted? Maybe, but it's kind of hard to do that. You sit there and cut the hair and then make sure to put tweezers and place them on it. Probably what you were thinking is make it look like a murder weapon. What do you think of on a murder weapon? Blood, not hairs and fat tissue. So that to me, that is kind of hard to explain away to argue that this kitchen knife isn't the murder weapon.
And we've talked about this a few times. So the prosecution points to two things to show that this is not the murder weapon. They point to the depth of the wounds, and they point to this towel, and they claim that that's what happened with this towel. And then they have the other knife, which is missing conveniently, the depth of which seems to fit. And we talked about this at some point. Dylan's mother will say she sent him the knife set and she kept the third knife. I don't know. That seems strange to me. That doesn't seem like the kind of thing you would expect to happen, but who knows? Maybe she did. What's interesting to me about the stab wound and the fact that it's not as deep, this whole crime is unusual. And I don't think this is a stabbing. I mean, it is a stabbing, but I don't think it's a stabbing. And the reason I don't think it's a stabbing, and the reason I think it could still be that kitchen knife, is because I don't know, and I don't think that this was not like a rage killing, for instance, right? This was not someone who was so angry that they're viciously stabbing Robert. These stab wounds remind me so much of the Jeffrey McDonald stab wounds. They are stab wounds that are done precisely with precision, not with violence. And so it's not surprising to me, despite what I've said in the past few episodes, that the knife would not have gone all the way in, because I don't think it's that kind of stabbing. And so I don't necessarily think Henry Lee is wrong. And I think the judge does a really smart thing here and basically says he used the towel and the knife because he wiped it down. And that's probably when it got the fibers on it. But the globule fat and the hairs probably came from the stabbing. And I think the judge is probably right about that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, this judge, really go read this opinion. She does a really good job, because even though she credits Lee's testimony, she actually finds that Joe Price likely wiped down the knife to some extent, but not necessarily to the prosecution's theory to make it look like the murder weapon, rather that it was the murder weapon and that Joe was wiping it possibly to remove fingerprints. His fingerprints specifically.
Let's do one more, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We don't have a whole lot more to say before we get into theories, but we do have a few other things, but I don't want to rush through them because they're worth doing, and we're definitely going to do another episode on this, at least one. Anyway, so we might as well save that. But I do want to talk about the needle punctures, because this is something that I think the documentary is misleading on. when you watch the documentary, it is presented to you as there are all these needle punctures which aren't accounted for, which leads to a conclusion that maybe he was injected with something. The problem is, if you read the opinion, you find that a lot of these are accounted for. During the ride in the ambulance, EMTs attempted to get an IV through the inside of Robert's left elbow, through his hand, and through the side of his neck. Now, all of these attempts were unsuccessful. Probably because at this point, I mean, he's in pretty bad shape. If not, he's been dead for a while. He still has. But because the EMTs are seeing this sort of, and people in the chat, we have so many doctors now, are talking about what it was, but he's got this sort of low-level electrical whatever in his heart. And so the EMTs are seeing some signs of life, so they're going to continue to work on him as if there's hope to save him, even though I think at this point there was no hope to save him. But they're trying to. But they can't get any of these lines in, but they've tried in 3 different places. They then get to the hospital, and they are able to establish lines in the side of his chest, near his femur, and his left clavicle. So that's 6 different places where needles were inserted into Robert. Now, where does the pathologist note needle punctures? His left neck, his chest, his hand, his forearm inside the left elbow. So despite what the documentary tells you, most of the punctures can be attributed to those efforts. However, not all of them. The pathologist found a puncture wound on Robert's right ankle, and that is one that no one has accounted for. There may be more, but that was the one that stuck out to me in the court's opinion. So it's not that there are a whole bunch of puncture wounds, but there may be one at least that cannot be accounted for by medical intervention that night, and he had not had any medical intervention before. And I don't know, the right ankle seems like a strange place to have a puncture wound anyway, but that's sort of the situation with the puncture wounds. A little bit more murky than maybe what's presented in the documentary.
And I think this will factor in a lot at the theory stage. But I think what's relevant from this takeaway is that it's not that he had a ton of puncture wounds that are unaccounted for, because that would affect my theory. Like if you had 10 puncture wounds, even 5 puncture wounds that are unaccounted for. But if we're looking more at maybe 1 or 2 unaccounted for puncture wounds, that's really interesting, and I think changes whatever theory you have for it. So the fact is, there is at least 1 unaccounted for puncture wound.
All right, so that's all we're going to talk about tonight when it comes to this case. Next week, we will be getting into theories, both the theories of the police, and eventually we'll get to our own theories. We're going to talk about some more about the stab wounds. We're back to those of you who were with us during the Ellen Greenberg case, and you remember when we tried to recreate some stabbings. The stabbings are not just stabbings. They have a really interesting orientation, and we're going to talk about that as well, and where you would have to be standing to stab someone in the way that Robert was stabbed, and what that may say about the case. And eventually we're going to get to what we think happened in this incredibly bizarre mystery. We know you guys have all sorts of thoughts and theories yourselves. We want to hear them. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod, for all your social media. Follow us on TikTok. You can see all the 1-star reviews that we're doing. They're so much fun. We enjoy them. Leave more 1-star reviews so we'll have more content. Or you can leave a 5-star review and leave a question, and then we will answer them on the show. Alice, would you like to answer a question tonight?
Always.
Always. Awesome. I love the questions. They're really one of my favorite things. So, okay, let's see, Alice. Do you want to do hard ones, fun ones? Oh, here's a good one. I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm going to have to think about this. This is from Jen Taylor. Jen Taylor wants to know, what was your favorite toy when you were a kid?
No.
That's a good question.
That is a nice question. Okay.
I mean, I had a lot of stuffed animals that I loved. I had this one little polar bear we called Coco, because he was one of those. It was when they did the Coca-Cola promotions, and you could get the little baby polar bears. So I had one of those. I love that thing. I took it all over the place. I loved Legos growing up. I used to have these epic Lego stories where like these very long stories involved, all these things were happening, and it would be like the pirates versus the Navy Legos and all this stuff. I used to have a lot of fun. So I think Legos were probably my favorite toy when I was a kid.
Okay, I'm going to go like young, like very young Alice.
Go very young. Very young.
Because like Legos were great, but that was like older. So my favorite toy when I was little was the Land Before Time Brontosaurus. What was his name? What was his real name? The main character. The Littlefoot, Bigfoot. Littlefoot
was his name, but I think he was either a Brachiosaurus or a Brontosaurus.
Oh, he was a Brachiosaurus. Okay, Littlefoot, like the main character of like the original Land Before Time. But I didn't know his name was Littlefoot because I think I was very young. I'm not even sure if I watched the movie at this point in my life. I was like 2 or 3, and it carried over as my favorite stuffed animal. And it was big, so it was like half of my size as a 3-year-old or whatever, and it was huge. And because he was a Brontosaurus or Brachiosaurus, he has like a long neck, and I loved him by like putting my head on his head, so his neck was permanently bent to one side, and that was the side I always hugged him on, and I called him Dink. And I don't know why, but I didn't know his name was Littlefoot. I just called him Dink, and I had him for like 10 years, like he was my sidekick. And I just remember the little bent head because that's just the way I always hugged him.
That's so cute. Whatever happened to Dink? Do you know where Dink is now?
I don't know. You know, my mom remodeled her house many years ago, and I think all my childhood memories went into the dump.
Yeah, that's a metaphor for getting older if there ever was one.
It's true.
Okay, let's see about this one, Alice. This is from Abbott.
Okay.
Abbott wants to know, as a brand new listener, what older episodes do you recommend?
What brand new episodes? Not the old ones?
Older.
Older.
It's a brand new listener who wants to know what older episodes
do they want to stick around?
You recommend.
I don't know. They're like my children. You know, I love all of them. I really do. I mean, I think, didn't we cover Delphi like in our first year? What was that second
Delphi
year?
Was really early. Yeah.
Delphi was really early. And I think that's interesting because I think that was the first case at least I felt personally affected by. Since then, basically all the cases personally affect me because I've just lost all barriers that I've put up. But because of what's going on now, I think it's really interesting to have listened to how we covered it back in the day when there was no arrest, no pending trial, none of the kind of malarkey that's happening. And it was about the crime scene and the profile of the person who could have done this. And I don't think we were that off, but we obviously didn't have all the information we have now. So I like those episodes because we had very little information to go on. And over time, I think it has come to fruition.
Yeah, I think Delphi was our first case we did really well. You know, we did some big cases before that. Yeah, I mean, because we did, a lot of people came to us from Michael Peterson. A lot of people came to us from Maura Murray. We did those before Delphi. But Delphi, to me, was the first case we did really well. And then I think we got progressively better. And then soon after that, we did Scott Peterson, which was also a big, big one. And then, you know, we also did Dyatlov Pass, which is, you know, if you listen to Dyatlov Pass and Scott Peterson, you kind of get the full experience, I feel like, with us. Because you get a deep dive on a crime, and you also get sort of our more standard mystery type stuff that we do every now and then. So I think any of those are good.
I think what it was for me, at least, was after Maura Murray, I realized I read enough 1-star reviews. I was like, who cares? Let's say what we believe.
Yeah, exactly.
That must have been what happened.
All right. Alice, this has been enjoyable as all. I can't wait to do it again with all of you. This case. This one, you know, this one may be the strangest case we've ever done. We've done some strange ones. The David Lewis case always sticks in my mind. I just don't understand how that happened. But this one is so strange because it's right there. Like there are so many people who know something in this one.
Yeah.
There's at least 2, maybe 3 people who know something, who know exactly what happened.
Are we going to talk about whether we'll talk about whether we think the judge got it right? Right.
That's
okay.
We're ending the episode, Alice. We're not going to talk about that right now.
I really want to talk about
that next week.
Because I'm curious what you have to say. Because I'll say I flip-flop multiple times.
Goodness.
I know.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody who joined us tonight on Patreon and joined us live. We love you guys. You're so helpful. You're always bringing great thoughts to the cases, and I think it makes the episodes even better. We really appreciate you and love you. And we will see you guys back again next week, and I'll see you there too, Alice. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
I'm a wee bit. I'm a wee bit sleepy, but what's new?
You're a wee bit sleepy?
I'm a wee bit sleepy.
Did you get everything done? You were gonna try and get done? I know you said you had a bunch to do.
Oh, I had to work all weekend. I don't know. No, it's not completely finished, but I got what I had to get done this weekend, and it was like late night. But it's okay. It's okay. No big deal. You guys. Who would be afraid of letting random bakers know my child's name.
Yeah. Here's you'll never guess it. I mean, you can try and guess it till the end of time. You never will.
Also, when I don't give you
all along.
It is. It is. I really.
Never.